Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are logging on in the world or watching again on our YouTube channel. And welcome to today's Infrastructure Intelligence webinar, organised in association with Deltek. And today we'll be discussing an issue that I think is extremely relevant, extremely topical as well, given the last couple of years that we've all actually been through. And that is the subject of disrupting construction. My name's Andy Walker. I'm the editor of Infrastructure Intelligence, and we have a panel of speakers today to take a look at how our industry, the construction and infrastructure sector, engineering, architecture, and other construction firms are actually being disrupted by a whole range of issues, whether that's regulations and compliance, increasing competition, technology, obviously a massive potential disruptor for our sector, and also changes to the way in which we engage with employees and the ways in which employees engage with us, often via technology, and something that we've seen particularly, haven't we, during the course of the last couple of years, and obviously the challenge of the pandemic. And what we'll be looking at today is to focus on some of those key issues and to ask some, searching questions really of the industry. What changes and business developments should we expect going forward? How is technology changing the way that construction operates, and what can we expect in the near term and indeed the longer term as far as our industry is concerned? We have an excellent panel to discuss these issues today. We have Nick Nieder, who's the Director of Product Management at Deltek, who are a high-profile, significant partner for many of the firms in our sector in the technology field. We've also got Sean Keys, the Managing Director of Sutcliffe, firm of engineers based in the north of England. We have the Chief Digital Officer of Turner & Townsend, no less, Nathan Marsh. And we also have one of the Civic Engineers Regional Directors, Annabelle Precious. So Nathan, Sean, Annabelle and Nick, welcome to today's event, and really looking forward to hearing your insights, and also to hopefully an interesting discussion and conversation following you each speak. Without further ado, I'm going to bring in, first of all, Nathan Marsh, who is the Chief Digital Officer for Turner & Townsend. And I'm really looking forward and very interested in listening to Nathan's comments and insights on this topic, very topical topic of disrupting construction. So over to you, Nathan.
Thank you very much, Andy, and good morning, everyone. So look, I'm Nathan, the CDO here at TNT at Turner & Townsend. It's a new role for us, and it really focuses our commitment on bringing the best use of digital systems and better structured and secure data into the major infrastructure delivery and business transformation program space. Absolutely delighted to be here today among such an august panel, and I'm very much looking forward to the conversation. I mean, our sector is certainly facing a suite of changes that on their own are pretty complex and impactful, but together I think bring us all a pretty complicated and enduring weather front that we've got no choice but to navigate successfully. However, there are some reasons to be optimistic, and for me they include there's no shortage of capital looking to invest in the right type of shovel-worthy infrastructure programs and schemes. That's exciting. There's a welcome and renewed focus on value, and I think value is best looked at through the three lenses of economic value, environmental value, and social value. I'm excited about that focus. We've had a pretty impressive bounce back from the constraints of the pandemic, with some brilliant and welcome innovations around workforce optimization through digital solutions like wearables, sensors on assets, etc. So I'm excited about that and what they're doing with safety and efficiency. I'm also excited excited to see a more program and systems-based approach to designing infrastructure delivery and also designing the right supplier ecosystems, treating the undertaking of delivery less like a project in inverted commas and more like an enduring economic activity with an impactful afterlife post-project close. And I'm really positive to see clients want to talk to us and other colleagues on this call about going into business together rather than just delivering a schedule. Standards, I'm excited to see BSI focus on more agile standards, particularly for digital and ESG. So that's really welcome as well. It gives us a target to aim for, but also something we can evolve. And lastly, on skills. We've got a lot to teach, but we've also got a lot to learn. So I welcome more explicit partnerships with other industries. We've got a bit more to do, however, as we conclude, or as I conclude. I think the dynamics are above are going to continue to disrupt us. But what we mustn't get is stage fright. So I'd love us all as an industry to work out how we're going to approach these because they will find us whether we want to or not. So it's really worth understanding the relationship. In terms of developments, I'm very keen on focusing on deal design and supply chain optimization. So how do we create the right conditions for an orderly transition to that more we're going into business together rather than just back-to-back contracts, although they have their place. I think we need to get real about this, and I'd love to see us make room structurally and economically in our businesses so we can understand new ways of working, operate on a more integrated and consistent way, a more systems way, rather than a transactional way. And actually, lastly, I'd love to see what we can do with targeted investment and innovation within all businesses, including my own, off the back of the pandemic. It's actually accelerated the way we embrace technology and new ways of working. So I guess as we conclude the opening for me, I'd love to see the commitment that we all make to making economic and structural room in our business to continue this change, and almost consider our businesses as having a two-geared engine, one to deliver the existing book and then one to think about what the next wave of innovation and ways of working look like. So look, on that note, lots of reasons to be optimistic, lots of changes to make, and looking forward to the conversation. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks very much, Nathan, for those initial observations. I think it's clear that we are all working in a changing industry environment with a multiplicity, really, of things that are actually coming at firms from different directions. And it's about how we actually deal with those going forward. But also, I think as well, maybe how we work more differently with clients as well, because I think that is, something that we're being exhorted to do, particularly by government, when you look at initiatives like the construction playbook and a renewed focus on value in all its guises as well. So I think, a lot to think about there. Our next panelist is Sean Keys, who is the Managing Director of Sutcliffe, who are a successful firm of consulting engineers based in the Northwest. Sean is also the chair of the Association for Consultancy and Engineering, their Northwest group as well. And I know, that he is someone who I think has prided himself throughout his career on being adaptable to change and being alive to the key issues that are developing in the industry. So without further ado, over to you, Sean.
Thank you very much for that, Andy. That was very flattering, which I will take today. So thank you. So as Andy was saying, my name is Sean Keys. I'm the Managing Director of Sutcliffe and the Regional Chair of the ACE. Today, really, I'm talking about digital disruption and how that's affecting our industry. So I'm going to take the perspective from a regional SME player with a strong base in the Northwest, North Wales, and I'll give you where I see we're at. One of the things that we've done for quite a number of years is we've invested heavily in digital because it's the future. So I think companies like Deltek are really valuable to our organization. And we've realized that we need to invest actually both financially and in our staff, and obviously give the staff time and to train and to improve and hone their skills. So we're not going to turn the clock back. We're not going to put the genie back in the bottle. The days of the drawing board haven't completely gone. We've still got one hidden in the storage room. One of the guys can't get rid of it, but digitization is completely here. One of the greatest examples of how digitization is here is currently I'm sat in Euston Station on my laptop. I've got my iPhone in my pocket, so everything's available. So on this call today, we've got people from around the UK, but we're all in the same room. A couple of the things that I want to see digitization improve in our sector is around productivity, sustainability, and help to bring in the next generation. So when we're recruiting at the moment, skills and digital skills are massively important, more so than in the past. And what it makes me realize is that the younger people, the iPhone generation, as I like to call them, I think they might be called the Z generation, but I call them the iPhone generation. They've got skills that the over 50s just don't have. So we need to make sure that we continue to train that age gap from school leaver to coming up to retirement. What's actually happened is that the pandemic has driven this and pushed this forward. So 4 years ago, most people were more than happy to come into the office and work, should we say 9 o'clock till 5 o'clock. Now, what has obviously happened is that's just changed. We were all forced in our industry, certainly on the consultancy side of the business, to work remotely. And that proved to be on the whole very, very successful. So surprisingly, if you'd have asked me before the COVID, I was expecting a drop in our productivity. Our productivity rose, which is a really surprising statistic. I think, unfortunately, though, with that productivity rising and with COVID, I'm not necessarily linking these 2 points together, but I think mental health dropped. So I think one of the problems with digitization is that you can't escape. I'm at the train station and there's 2 people in the office and there's 2 people at home, so you can't escape. So that there's another layer of pressure. That's something that we need to be careful with. A couple of problems that we've experienced is being about compliance and competition within the sector. So if we use a variety of software from Civils 3D to Revit to RAM to even the Microsoft packages, including other software around file management, and making sure that the software suits your organization, you get the most out of it, is really important. And one of the issues that we've experienced, that if you're doing 3D type work, in our sector, there's very, very little competition. So you're forced to work with people, certain organizations. Now, generally they're fabulous, but competition is important. That keeps quality high and cost at an economic level. I'm not saying costs should be cheap, but it needs to ensure that the quality is high. One thing that I'll finish my short talk that we've done is we are investing 10% of our profits every single year in improving our digitization of our company, and that is saving benefits. So we want the UK PLC to stay ahead of the game, and one of the ways we can do that is continue to invest in our technology, continually improve it. And I think the technology is becoming out of date within 2 to maybe 5 years, so there has to be a continual process. If I pass the ball back to you, Andy, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed for that, Sean, and really encouraging as well. What you said there about digital investment. It's certainly something that we've seen in many of the online events that we've been holding, and also in much of the coverage that we've been carrying on the infrastructure intelligence website, that, more and more firms, I think, are realizing that, there was always, I think, an understanding that there needed to be more investment in the digital sphere. But I think there's no question that the pandemic has accelerated a process that was already underway. And I think some firms that have maybe been putting it on, if not the back burner, thinking, well, yeah, we know we need to invest in that area and we'll get to it, have obviously had, shall we say, in some cases, a rude awakening where they've had to actually really start to move into that area itself. So, I think, again, I think we can explore, some more questions around that whole digital investment piece during the course of the discussion and the conversation a little bit later. But thanks, Sean, for the time being. Our next panelist is Annabelle Precious, who is a regional director with the engineers, Civic Engineers. Annabelle has many years' experience in transport planning, engineering and design, and she works out of the Civic Engineers London studio, although I know, like many of us, she'll be working somewhat sort of in a blended way, shall we put it, and also sometimes remotely as well, because of the circumstances that we are all in at the moment. Anyway, over to you, Annabelle. You're very welcome.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Andy, and thanks for having me on the panel today. It's been really interesting to hear already what Nathan and Sean have said. So, introduce myself. I'm Annabelle Precious, a civil engineer and transport planner with over 20 years experience in working in the industry. And I've designed and delivered many sustainable transport schemes. So I'm from Civic Engineers. We're structural, civil and transport engineers with a passion for understanding and continually improving the impact that engineering can have on our environments, our communities and on the economy. So we thrive on bringing more to the design table than just engineering, and we strive to collaborate with others to create something better. So being a civil engineer working in the transport industry, I'm really passionate about encouraging and promoting the use of sustainable travel through the design and provision of appropriate infrastructure and environments, so that we and our next generation can live and thrive through travelling freely under our own steam. So today I'm going to talk through my view of what we've learned during the pandemic and how it's changed the way, and it will really disrupt the way that we travel forever. I'm going to describe how we approach design at Civic Engineers and what we're doing to bring about a better normal working environment so that we can retain the best staff. So in terms of societal changes that's been brought about by the pandemic to work and therefore travel, I think during lockdown, we all spent a lot more time exploring our local neighbourhoods, which really reinforced the 20-minute neighbourhood concept, where everything you need is within a 20-minute journey of where you live. So during lockdown, during some parts of it, the sun came out, we transitioned to working from home. We spent more time out in nature with our 1 hour that we were allowed outside a day, exploring the places that we hadn't really had a chance maybe to explore before, and really building our communities. So I've been harping on for years as a transport planner about how active travel is good for you, how we can walk and cycle far more if we put our minds to it. So evidence throughout the UK shows that over half of all journeys are under 5 kilometres in length. So a distance that would maybe take 40 minutes to walk or about 20-minute cycle. But in reality, almost 3/4 of these journeys are carried out by car, which is not only bad for the environment as it's burning fossil fuels, damaging our air quality, causing particulate matter from tyre wear and making us physically inactive, but also creating busy roads which make it less likely for people to want to walk and cycle to places due to fears of perceived safety. So physical inactivity in itself causes all sorts of associated problems of physical and well-being issues, putting more pressure on our health services. Our roads are so busy, our town centres are taken up by traffic and streets become car parks rather than places where people want to spend time. So our town centres are suffering, I think, as a result of a lot of this, and town centres are now having to completely transition and reinvent themselves as retail is significantly changing. So what is the answer? Well, I think it really starts with how we design our towns and cities. We need movement networks that make it easier, cheaper and safer and more enjoyable for people to get from A to B by active travel, rather than taking the current easy choice, which for many is to get in your car, which might be parked just outside your front door, you drive to your destination and then drive home again. So according to research that was carried out for the Department for Transport in their recent decarbonising transport plan, over the past 20 years or so, car use has got 15% cheaper overall, and bus travel cost has increased by 40%. So it's supply and demand. Housing developers are building houses with a driveway and huge road infrastructure to support huge levels of development traffic. But things really need to change if we're to meet the net zero targets by 2050. And things can change, and there are other ways. So I think the proximity of services and facilities plays a huge role in how viable it is to travel by sustainable modes of transport. And I think a lot of design is about emotional intelligence. It's about how using a street or the transport network makes you feel. So we as a family ditched a second car many years ago, choosing instead to walk or cycle for all of our short journeys. And it's good, it makes you feel better, you get active to get to places, and it's better for you and for the environment. my children are now really passionate about, not using the car, and they really enjoy being active to get to local places. So I read some really interesting research just yesterday related to design for an e-scooter park, which are becoming more and more common now that e-scooters are becoming more popular. So this reported that 8 out of 10 women want to park in well-lit areas, and 3/4 of women in the UK cities only want to park where there's CCTV, and women prefer to take a safer route, not just the fastest route. So I find this really frustrating because we already know all of this. We've got best practice examples on how we can do this, but like many things, unless you're forced to do something through regulation or legislation, it doesn't always happen. So I think a lot of this is about changing our mindsets and changing the conversation about sacrificing things to be able to achieve net zero targets. And there really is there's no less pleasure or less commercial advantage in many cases in creating places we want and that are good for us and the environment in the long term. It is possible to create what we want around a climate positive agenda. So we're in the process of writing the net zero design guidance for some developments. And we're having to set really aspirational targets, which is great. And I think the coming few years will be really interesting to see how mainstream the new normal approach to design has to become to achieve carbon targets we all need. I think it's important we aren't distracted by things like electric vehicle infrastructure being the only way that we can achieve net zero targets. Obviously, electric vehicles have a role to play with some longer journeys that can't be made by walking or cycling or public transport. For example, if you're transporting children or elderly or ill people. But electric vehicles aren't able to solve all of our carbon emission problems. It's just moving the problem onto something else. So in terms of the way we work, we've needed societal and workplace changes for a while, and the pandemic has really accelerated the change how we want to work. So, during the pandemic, some people have been able to work from home, take a breath, yet still be really productive, as Sean has already mentioned. We've had time to work out what we really wanted from our jobs and from our lives. And it was a chance to think about our good, creating a good work-life balance and what's really important. So at Civic Engineers, we asked our staff what they wanted. We really tried to listen and developed a better normal way of working, which provides a hybrid working model to incorporate flexibility to those that need it, whilst making sure that more senior staff are always still available to assist with training younger staff who don't necessarily want to work from home. Our staff told us a lot as well about how important it is to really have a sense of purpose in their role and to feel part of a team that can really make a difference to improving people's lives, which as engineers, we all have the ability to do, and we're really being relied upon for a sustainable future. So we're still continuing to work out this shift to our better normal and what works for everyone, but we aim to prioritise openness and empathy and understanding with all colleagues to be able to welcome all viewpoints with this approach. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Annabelle, and for giving us a real insight there into the way in which not just the pandemic, but also a different approach to how we work, and a number of influences there as well, including societal things like, well-being, the whole net zero agenda, which I think is a very interesting issue anyway, and one which is obviously still very much a live issue post COP26. But also we know, don't we, that increasingly in our industry, there'll be no major projects, almost no projects at all, that are actually going to be designed and delivered without without being net zero compliant, and that will in and of itself disrupt the way in which the industry works going forward. So thanks very much indeed for that. Our next speaker is Nick Nieder, and Nick he leads the product management team delivering Deltek project information management at Deltek. We're really pleased to be working with Deltek on this particular event today. Deltek delivers software and information solutions to our sector, and very much focused on the architecture, engineering and consulting and construction sector. So they work very closely with many consultancy firms and many architectural firms in our sector. So I know that, you know, from Nick, we'll be getting some very interesting insights into not just how they work, but also into this whole question of how disruption is changing the way our industry and our sector operates. So Nick, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Andy, and welcome, everybody. Thanks for the time to be with us. So yeah, my name's Nick Needer. I lead a product development group here at Deltek. Deltek's an organisation that really driven around supporting project-based businesses in the broadest sense of the word, with technologies that enable them to be successful. And I think the biggest challenge to everybody's success in the last 18 months has no doubt been COVID. And we've seen some really interesting pivots in working practices since the pandemic hit, the new norm, as somewhat it can be called. And I think what we discovered talking to our clients and working across a range of clients in the different sectors we support was those clients that were digitally match fit pre-COVID have had a less bumpy ride during COVID, although even organisations that had made commitments in the past to this and had invested heavily in this part have reevaluated what they're doing and how they're doing with a new passion, fervency, and have really seen some changes that they maybe would have put on the too hard pile and have been talking about for years and years and years, and suddenly flip of a coin and everybody's used to, whether it's remote working, whether it's accessing information from lots of sources. So the COVID pivot we saw as a really interesting footnote overall to how the organizations, how all our client organizations have coped during this time. And now talking with clients, they're looking beyond that. They're looking beyond the coping of the short term into the mid and long term, and how they can take the energies that they have adopted and technologies they've adopted and the mindset to look at things from a different perspective, to reinvigorate their digital transformation processes and engaging all the way through their organization. And I think it's fantastic listening to Annabelle here, when, if you need to find out what you need to do, then go and ask your people and actually find out what makes them drive your business. I think it's a really interesting cultural change that maybe has come out of this, as well as we become all more inclusive of coping with a difficult situation. So I think that's been really fascinating, talking to clients across the base, clients who were not as match fit around their digital position have accelerated and challenged the old norms of it can't, it shan't, and actually taken a view going forward where it's a do or die. It's a, we need to shift, we have to do it, so let's do it. And now they're looking at the lessons they've learned from that and continuing the normalization of this so that they can drive their businesses forward and maybe deal with some of the longer term issues that we as a industry have been looking at. My background was within IT and civil engineering prior to working for Deltek, and walking around on sites and talking to site teams around their challenges of communication, access to information, as well as the overall productivity challenge of not being able to make the right decision in the right way, or having to wait for those quite elongated approval processes. I think it's really, really fascinating as to businesses now thinking forward, looking at how they do business, simplifying the way that they do business. IT for a long time has a poor reputation for over complexity. And actually, one thing that our digital natives, our iPad generation tell us is it's got to be simple. Yeah, they want to work in a way, but it's got to be simple to be adopted. Should you really have to go and do 3 days worth of training to learn how to do something? Or should you be able to pick it up, give it a go, not be intimidated by it, not go back to the old way? And it fascinates me to see in organizations sometimes how much effort can go into not adhering to a standard, to work around the problem, coming from contracting that particularly prevalent maybe, so rather than just adopting and understanding. So I think that's there. Here at Deltek, one of the things that product group are very focused around is what we call purposeful innovation. So in short terms, not shiny for the sake of being shiny, actually looking at what a business need is and looking at the simplified way that we can support organizations to change the way they work, giving them technologies to support that. And I think that's going to grow forward. And I really see automation and taking the dross out of day-to-day business activities coming into play a little bit more. And undoubtedly, I think integration. I think the ability to allow you to understand your position without having to go to umpteen solutions. And Sean, your statement there, I think is really interesting around the numbers of technologies you have in your business. So I think integration approaches, the use of something like iPaaS technologies going forward, I think are really going to drive us, and it's something Deltek is really focused on at the moment. Andy.
Thanks very much for that, Nick. And that purposeful innovation, what you said there is actually quite an interesting way of looking at it. Don't be shiny for the sake of it. And that's not to say that we shouldn't be shiny. I mean, obviously we all want to be shiny and happy. But at the same time, it's got to be practical, and as you said, it's got to be simple. If actually people are going to buy in to that process as well. We've now got some time to have some questions and to have some discussion, and I just want to kick off with one particular question first of all, which I'll go round the panel with, and that is, we talk about, there's a lot of talk about technology, digital transformation. Obviously, we all work for clients in this industry. Do clients really understand digital transformation and the benefits that can accrue from that, or is there a job of work to be done to educate them about the benefits of that? And does it even matter? And do they even care? As long as they actually get what they want at the end of it all, is there something that we need to do in that area? And I'll address that question first of all to Nathan, if I may. What's your thoughts on that, Nathan?
Thanks, Andy. Well, I don't think, sadly, it's a straight answer. It's not a consistent answer. There's a range of different levels of appetite and maturity. Some organizations and some leaders will put digital as the end rather than the means. I personally think it's a means to unlock value. I think the more progressive organizations that are getting it right across our sector appear more naturally embracing digital. They've sort of normalized the thinking, because that's where it starts in the thinking and design stages for these major programs and deals. And then they're taking a digital by default approach. So they're bringing in the right use of systems, better data, RPA, analytics, as easily and as comfortably and as maturely as they are around sound scheduling and a strong supply chain. So they've sort of normalized it. I think that's really important, an acceptance that it's just completely normal and perennial and it's here to stay, but it then enables great delivery, great outcomes that we literally have to live with. So it's a means to an end. I think that's really important. And the mindset of it's here to stay and we've got to get good at it, because I think it's just a core skill, but it's patchy across our sector. We have pockets of excellence and pockets of despair, in my opinion.
Thanks, Nathan. Annabelle, just turning to you on that, the view of clients around digital transformation. Do they really get it? Do they want to see that innovation, in your opinion, or is there always something that we need to be thinking about? Well, maybe we need to actually explain this a bit better.
Okay, well, I think clients. What do clients want? I think clients really want value for money. That's the most important thing for a client. They want to deliver what they've set out to deliver, and obviously they come to us to try and help them do that. So I think it's keeping that at the forefront of our minds. And it's about really, thinking and trying to engage with them in however, whatever medium that takes. Obviously, it's very easy now to just set up Teams calls and meetings very easily. So I think that really works. And I think it's really vital that at the start of projects, we really, to spend that time and, communicate, we collaborate with them to really try and understand what it is that they want. Ask the difficult questions, keep being trying to collaborate and communicate together so that you can, be curious, you can investigate all the different options, which I think technology enables us to do. I think it's really important that we don't just jump to conclusions and, let's use technology in a very creative way. So we're very much about, thinking about the start of a project, really understanding, what those clients' needs are, investigating all the options and using technology to be able to do that through, we're a big fan of sketching and actually, trying to sketch out your options and just get ideas down. So we're using technology to be able to do that. Everybody's, got access to a Wacom pad or a touch screen laptop so that they can draw the ideas down, start to communicate ideas very simply, but really effectively, I think, through using technology. So yeah, I think it's making sure that we're giving our clients value for money, and technology has a part in that. But I think it's the process of continually engaging and being curious about how we can better solutions to get more value for money for for our clients, and then the whole environment as a whole, and people that are using this infrastructure as a whole.
Thanks, Annabelle. Sean, your observations on maybe the client experience of digital transformation and change?
I'd split it into a range, as Nathan said. I think private clients really are just looking for the best value, not necessarily the cheapest cost, but best value. So if the better technology gives them the better solution, then that's the solution they would push with. On the private sector, particularly around the hospitals, they're all looking for a much greater level of digitization and how everything's drawn, how everything's stored. And in some ways, if I'm honest with you, that can create an extra level of work that in other types of projects we don't have to deal with. So we do actually have to set up our projects in different ways depending on who the client is. The clients do want the best value, and if you ask your client what they deem as best value, then for a speculative developer, it'd be how much money you made. For an NHS trust, is how fabulous and well constructed the building was and what the client's experience was around the project. So they have different aspirations. And I suppose the client, if we have the best technology, we can give them the most economic and accurate solution. So the sophisticated clients can say, if you've got the best software, then they actually get the best answer, but sooner.
Thanks for that, Sean. Nick, do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard on that?
Yeah, I would lead on.
Question.
I would lead on from Sean, really, that not all clients are the same. Not all expectations are the same. But I also wonder whether there's a broader thing here, which is, in the past, a project delivering a structure would have stood up on its own. It would have been what it was. Going forward now, that's got to live in a truly digital environment, the rest of our world. And therefore, having a building built one way, but the rest of the world working in a different way, there's a big disconnect. And I think also where maybe the private sector client hasn't focused in the past, but may focus more in the future, and this is a bit of a sustainability angle here, but it's actually about whole life of cost. Whereas, we build hospitals now and we want them here in 40 years' time serving their communities, therefore understanding everything that went into building it, because it's going to transform over a period of time, is a guarantee. Whereas the private sector maybe build a structure with an end contract in mind. I just think if we wanted to improve productivity, if we want to improve sustainability, if we want to understand the building information that sits behind it all, then that's our way forward. And I think that's where this will be disrupted more and more across all clients, and not just those clients as are fully digitally educated at the moment.
Thanks, Nick. It's interesting you mentioned productivity there, because that's been something that I know has been exercised in many minds in our sector, and particularly the relative, and I stress the term relative, poor productivity around some major infrastructure projects. What does the panel think are the root causes of that poor productivity? And I'm sure there are many. But I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, particularly on major construction programs. And how would you approach a solution to dealing with that and how should the industry actually address that issue in the widest possible way. And if I can just start that one off with Annabelle first, and then I'll bring Nathan in after that, because I know that Turner and Townsend have written extensively on the question of major projects, and I'm sure Nathan will have some thoughts on that. But maybe first turning to you, Annabelle, this question of productivity and the relative poor productivity in the industry. How do we deal with it? How do we address it?
Yeah, I mean, it is a it's a very complex and difficult problem, and obviously, some of the big projects are hugely complex. But I think for me, it's all about going back to purpose and speaking, as I spoke earlier, about a team, and in a team it's really important to have a purpose and know your role. So I think a lot of it is about breaking that down into communicating actually what you're trying to achieve, and once you know what you try to achieve in very small steps, then you can get there. So I think it's focusing on purpose and how that team can really work together, and what are you trying to achieve, what are your with bigger schemes, it's breaking it down into smaller schemes and really defining the purpose of that team to really try and deliver it together.
Thanks, Annabelle. Nathan, your views on this productivity question.
Thanks, Andy. Well, look, it's something I've been asked to agonise on a lot recently. We just issued last week our IPA partnership report with CBI on programs with purpose and how we get the conditions correct, or as correct as they can be, to drive up productivity. That's worth a look. But I think in terms of the main things that we've been wrestling with, we need to be really clear and honest around how we measure productivity. Is the exclusive focus on earned value, which is an important metric, the primary one? I'm not sure it is anymore. And let's really understand what earned value within a schedule, how that stacks up against some of those broader indices of value I mentioned earlier: social value, environmental value, and economic value. I'm not sure we take a consistent approach to measuring and driving productivity. I mean, we can talk about RPA and schedule optimization, but I'm very keen on us bringing in, again, a more systems thinking approach and a more digital by default approach to program design to make them as optimized and as productive at the design stage before they get going, and then you can drive efficiency through as we learn more throughout the life of a project. And also, I wonder whether we've got enough alignment. There's certainly contractual alignment when there's back-to-back contracts in place, but do we have a real sense of unified mission, unified purpose? To Annabelle's point, I think we see examples of that, but that can sometimes get tested when the contractuals come into play. So really aligning around a mission as well as having aligned work streams. I mean, in terms of some of the solutions, I also think we can look at the monetization and value of data. Better use of data brings value to the delivery of a project, but also it increases value in the data itself. Our friends at National Highways have had their data valued, and it's worth almost as much as their physical assets. Now, as we all get better at data valuation, I think the monetization and commercialization of a project's data and a program's data is a really exciting angle to drive up productivity within the delivery cycle, and then also subsequently. So that's an asset or a deliverable that can pop out of the program. So a few thoughts there, but I think let's keep focused on making sure that we design productivity in, we measure it properly, and then at the end we really do take a broader view as well as a schedule view on has that program or project delivered against GVA and GDP contribution as well as within the project.
Thanks, Nathan. Sean, just turning to you. You spoke about productivity in some ways, booking, maybe the trend during the course of the pandemic. You mentioned that your productivity actually went up. I mean, are there some lessons there to be learned about how we actually have that focus on improving productivity, but also in your experience on projects, why is the industry seen as, and I stress that, seen as maybe having lower productivity than it ought to have?
So if we talked about Sutcliffe's, we've actually improved our productivity by having everybody aligned. I think, as Nathan said, if everybody in your team wants to run as fast as humanly possible, you're not dragging everybody along, you'll run faster. So I think that's a psychological thing. It's not necessarily a digitization thing, but it's actually making the team one strong team. Now, so that's what we've done in our organization and saved great benefits. So if we take a wider view in terms of a construction project, the ones that go well are where the team is a team, where everybody wants to win. There's nobody in the team who's poorly performing, and occasionally there is, because we all have off days. So, but generally everybody's wanting to go in the same direction. And I think how we measure value isn't quite right. It's not lowest cost. In fact, to be honest, it's really lowest cost. It's really lowest cost. It's so putting social value in there, sustainability. In 100 years from now, we will look back on companies, and hopefully none of us who are listening to this will be one of those companies who didn't do enough to make the environment better than it is today. So sustainability and social value. And I've got one other little thing, which is a fact that probably the QSs know more than the engineers. I was chatting to a friend of mine who's a ground worker. The average profit rate for a ground worker is 0.7%. So when you're working with, not ground worker, sorry, main contractor, when you're working with such small margins, it increases the likelihood that when you get your opportunity to claim for extra cost, then you tend to do that. And I've come across a number of projects over the last 18 months where the clients have squeezed the cost on that element of it, and it ends up bringing a bad productivity to the project. I don't want to be the emphasis of what I've said, because I really do the thing that social value and sustainability and everybody in a line is by far the most important thing that I've said.
Thanks very much, Sean, for that. Just turning to you, Nick, in terms of bringing all these different strands together. How do you see that from your position, working with companies in our sector, around this whole improving productivity piece?
I think it splits into two pieces. I think there's a piece around setting projects up for success. It's not only spending the time planning about what you're going to do, but planning around how you're going to do, so that the flow of information around a project can be as effective as possible, so that collaboration can be as effective as possible. And it's that soft side of setting a project up, thinking beyond the contract. That's what keeps everybody real, but actually does it deliver? And I think for that, it's around spending the time in the protocols up front of the partnering, call it whatever you want, so that you can set yourself up for success. I think of some of the large projects I've worked on over the years, whether it be Olympic Park or central projects in London itself, what was really clear to me is technology for the right reasons. Technology that doesn't become the barrier to a decision, but it becomes a facilitator of a decision. I've got to go and put it here for it to then go somewhere else kind of clunkiness, which can go on, and sheer person marking that can go on in projects when you have document controllers in one community and another document controller in another organization and another and another, and that complexity. So coming back to where I think the future lies, I think it's around simplification of the process of delivery. It's around making the information widely available at the right time, at the right place, in the right way, so it can be consumed by the right people to make the right decision. And I think that will really help drive the information flow productivity. And then valuing that information, it then improves the outcome for the client. So picking up on what Nathan was saying, you're a client, you ask for a job to be done, you've got bricks and mortar, you've been given a value there of your asset, but also what's the digital asset that sits on the side of it that allows you then to be more effective in how you operate.
Thanks, Nick. Interesting. A couple of our speakers have focused in on alignment and, I suppose, working better together, really, within the industry. And that's something the industry has been speaking about for many, many, many years, going back as far as even the Egan report, which I'm sadly old enough to remember. And then post that, obviously, we had the Armit review and goodness knows what else. How effective will collaboration be in moving the industry forward, having much more alignment between clients, contractors, consultants, and what effect will that have on the ability of the industry to adapt to change and, I suppose, to disrupt itself better by working in that way? And I wonder what Annabelle thinks about that. So this concept of more collaboration, how do we facilitate that and stay on the same page together?
It's a really interesting question, and I guess what I'm thinking is that we're all having our minds really focused at the moment in terms of the climate agenda and what's just come out of COP26 and a lot of the discussion around that. Actually, we've gone past the time of having to think about what we're going to do. We actually need to be doing it already. So in my mind, I'm thinking we're so focused now on where we need to be. We need regulation to be written and understood so that it's very clear. We know our targets. It's just how do we get there, and let's work out the process to get there. And we really need everybody to just be so focused on that, because there isn't another option. We've got to do it. So I'm hoping that focus will give us what we need to really make the next few years count.
Just turning to Sean on this collaboration area, do you think the industry does that effectively at the moment, and do you see more of it in the future, particularly when we see potential disruptors coming into the industry, new organizations with different skills? How do you view that?
I would say yes, they do. The disruption is work. What I would just break disruption down. I would describe disruption in the past as a continual process to improve. That's what I'm looking at, a continual process that never stops. Every day, I'm going to get a little bit better. So new people coming into the marketplace is fabulous. It forces us to change. But let's not forget, the best projects that I've ever done are when I've known the whole team and we're all looking out for each other. But then every so often, when there's something stayed in that team, then you need the disruptor to come in and say, we're going to change that process. So I'm actually seeing collaboration as really important. And the role of a disruptor is also really important, as long as it's not disruption for disruption's sake, just so they can either disrupt the market so they can get a greater market share. If their motive is to disrupt the market, to introduce a new software package or a new construction technique, which is just better than the rest, and everybody's still driving around in their Model T Fords, then in that aspect, 100%.
Thanks, Sean. Nathan, your views on that working more collaboratively?
I think we need to have and make more consistent those Olympics moments. The Olympics saw the disruption, and I think it was deliberate, but it was certainly well intended, the disruption of how major infrastructure is designed and delivered in harmony. It was the mission, the massive mission. So what's our version of the Olympics as we gust toward 2022? Maybe it's one program, or maybe it's more of a mindset, and I think we need to distill the Olympics formula and apply that to major infrastructure delivery, and see if we can somehow kind of institutionalize that bringing together contractually and emotionally the right sorts of partners. And I think, having spent time in a design agency, a Big Four consultancy, a contractor, and now, very much a sort of a PM delivery organization, so I've sort of seen it from a number of different angles. And I do think that Olympics moment has got some magic that we can distill and bring forward. But I'd love to know, as an industry leader, what others think about how we can get that and make it our sort of Olympics moment for the next year onwards.
Thanks, Nathan. Interesting you mentioned that Olympics moment. I mean, obviously there was an imperative; it had to be delivered on time. We couldn't, have the national stroke international embarrassment of not delivering it. But clearly, in amongst the way that was delivered, there must be a kernel of learnings for the industry going forward. And turning to Nick, I know that you were involved in some of that in the past. Your views on how do we create that Olympics moment that Nathan spoke about.
So for me, I think in the past, if you've wanted to go and from a technology perspective collaborate, you went to a collaboration platform. You went somewhere to do that, and therefore you had to adopt one or many different solutions because you were involved in a whole range of works, different projects. I think the way forward, and I think this comes out of the growth of the pandemic, is allowing people to collaborate natively. Use their standard tools that they use day by day, but enable those to become more integrated so that you can work within teams, but still get your data that's in a data source that is shared across a bigger project community, or allow you to work in other specialist solutions that give you capability, point capability, but then more broadly allow that to be used more centrally in a standard platform. So I do see a degree of standardization around core products such as Teams, such as Zoom, the kind of the backbone, but then seeing point solutions that sit around it and data source solutions that sit around it that says, actually, on this project, I could be using solution A, on that project, I could be using solution B, but more importantly, my today is in the platform I'm comfortable within, I'm confident in, and I maximize its usage. For too long, big complicated software solutions were used to collaborate and only a fraction of their functionality was used. Yeah, theoretically, it could do amazing things, but if you cut it down to the simplified view of what's needed to deliver a project and be consistent with all of the project parties involved, I think you then have to think about trying to do that more natively than you may have done in the past.
Thanks, Nick. I mean, there's a lot of talk in the industry and discussion, particularly off the back of things like the relatively recently launched Construction Pro playbook about more collaboration. Clearly, though, and I don't know whether it's an elephant in the room or just something that we have to deal with, and that is the contractual risk situation regarding more collaboration. Because once you start collaborating to a greater extent, there's more moving parts. On the one hand, it should be easier, and there should be a space to achieve smoother outcomes. But at the same time, the contracts that the industry is using, and we discussed this on an infrastructure intelligence webinar a few months ago, when we asked the question, does the way the industry need to change, or do contracts need to change to support change in the industry? So what do our panelists think about the contracts that we're currently using? Are they set up to be collaborative? And if they're not, how do we basically try and get them changed or get the industry to accept that there needs to be a different approach to risk? Because fundamentally, we were in danger of everyone falling back on the old way of doing things because it's a risk management point of view. I'll turn to Sean Keys first for that to see what his views are on it.
That's a great question. The real reason why nobody wants to change the contracts is really because when you write a new contract, people don't actually always know where they stand. And I do actually understand that. So if we get a JCT contract or an NEC contract, we internally know what our responsibilities are. But if the contract is set up well between the parties early days, the ones I like were some of the partnering contracts where everybody got to know each other before the contract. And then the contract sits on side and everybody understands it. So there's a bit of education required. I think we'll struggle to have a major contract change, but I would actually like to see the split of responsibility when things go well or when things go wrong to be more evenly spread, and not for what appears to be the case, 90% of the risk with the contractor. So there needs to be a mechanism that a little bit more pain and gain. So it shouldn't necessarily be an equal split. So if a consultant's fees are 1% of a contractor's fee, he's in for 1% if it goes good or bad. I'll pass that back.
Thanks, Sean. Nathan, your views on the contractual situation that we currently have in the industry. How do we make sure that they are facilitating the industry working in a different way?
Look, I'd love to see the words and the sentiment around collaboration come off the page and enter the contractual landscape and the deal design. I think a refreshed deal design that I touched on earlier is really important. At the moment, we do have some pretty effective trading relationships, but they are trading relationships based on contractuals and schedules and commodities, and I sort of get that. what Sean has very articulately put is that we need to move probably to a more encompassing business relationship where we're really in this together, so we can start to look at, as well as cost and schedule contracts, because we need that, look at outcomes and how we perform against outcomes, how we do appropriate apportionment of risk, and it's not fixed because the risk profile changes throughout the life of a contract, particularly on a major scheme like lower Thames, High Speed 2. The risk profile is rather like the Alps. So let's just get used to that and rather have a flat approach to it. Let's think about how we hold risk, and do we change a holding mechanism for risk? Do we box it into a specially funded entity perhaps? And also let's make economic room in programs for innovation and optimization in ways of working. I guess what I'm saying is, rather than a fixed contract or contractual landscape for the life of a project, let's have that as a sound foundation so we don't increase the risk or take a flippant approach to it. But let's also recognize that particularly in major infrastructure delivery, life changes over 5 and 10 year delivery profiles. So let's think about risk reviews, exposure reviews, innovation reviews, outcome alignment, etc. So almost a two sort of swim lane or 2 work stream approach to deal design. That's what I think we need.
Thanks, Nathan. Annabelle, what's your view on the whole risk area? And presumably, you want to be as innovative as you possibly can be to provide that value to clients. But what about the risk issue?
Yeah, I think it's, risk management is clearly something that it defines a lot of this, and what contracts are all based on. I think it's really important to spend a lot of time to start with working out what those risks are, keeping that risk register completely up to date, making sure everyone's aware so that partnering can really happen, and transfer of risk isn't then unfairly transferred to a party that don't necessarily have control at the point that they take that on. So I think it's down to all parties. It's down to clients, it's down to designers, it's down to contractors to fully understand all of these issues to start with, and then working out the best way to mitigate it. And I was going to bring in potentially, do we need something that's more about just monetary value? Do we need to bring in other values? Lots of talk about social value. The carbon agenda actually is that a way we can start to shift this mindset, to being able to collaborate better together, to bring in other sources other than just monetary into contracts.
That's a very good point. I want to return to that issue around different ways of looking at value in a minute, but I just want to give Nick a chance to come back on this area of risk and maybe reflect on some of the work that you guys do in terms of helping organizations minimize risk in the in the project process. Have you got any thoughts on that?
It really is pretty simple from my perspective here. It's information, information, and information. If you've got the right information in the right hands of the right people, they'll make the right decisions. And in some respects, at that point, the contract almost sits out to one side because you're not having to exercise the contract too heavily. It's, we only see the really difficult arbitrated end games that come out in our industry when decisions have gone wrong. And people haven't understood the risk, as Annabelle's saying, and those key tenets of making good decisions aren't in place. So for me, the work that we do with our client base is making sure, from a risk perspective, they have their one place of truth, they have their information in the place they need it, so that they can have it in the day of making a decision, but all the way along to the 12 years plus of the liability, and know that they've got that information to protect their position. But more importantly, that they're feeding that information into the project community in the right way, at the right time, and it being correct, so that right decisions can be made.
Thanks very much for that. Nick, I want to come back to this point that Annabelle kind of hinted at, and that is this whole area of value, because there is an increasing amount of focus, rightly in my view, both not just in the industry, but also in from government, and also I sense around society as well, about having a greater focus on the whole, I suppose the ESG agenda that people talk about, environmental, social, and governance. And I think obviously, we're seeing that partly in the environmental agenda, but I think it goes wider than that as well. It's not just about safeguarding the future and meeting net zero. It's about providing, and showing that we can provide real value, real social value, in terms of the delivery of the projects that our industry actually does deliver. So what do the panel think about how a greater adherence to the ESG agenda will actually disrupt our industry going forward? And how can we get on the front foot on that so that we're not actually, being pushed, by outside forces to say, well, actually, this is what you should be doing. I mean, from my perspective, it kind of should be automatic, because everything that this industry does to one degree or another changes people's lives. So how do we think that, the different ways of looking at value, the ESG agenda will change the way that we work going forward? And I'll kick that off with Nathan, if I may.
It's not all about the money. It's not all about the economics, but a lot of the institutions and the large private equity firms will now make investment decisions based on a range of factors, but increasingly ESG upfront. So shovel-worthy, investment-ready schemes will need to and the supply chains will need to demonstrate in their own way that they're serious about their commitment, a material and lasting commitment to ESG, social value, etc. And it's really important that we understand what that quantifies down to in terms of the contractual landscape and the deal design. It's coming off the page. It hasn't landed yet. And I think we've all, as an industry, got a bit of a journey to go on in terms of how we're going to make it real. But it's stark to me, spending a bit of time talking to funds and institutions, saying, do you know what? If we see two schemes or a selection of schemes, though, and they're all broadly investable from an economic return perspective, those that have stronger ESG credentials will get the investment capital. So it's not all about that, but that's a pretty clear starting point. And I think, find that might be more stick than carrot, but it's certainly changing the way then that contractors, supply chains, designers start to organize their commitments. So I think it's a good thing, but it's happening. But I don't think we've matured yet as an organization, or indeed an industry, to say, right, specifically, that's how we're going to measure it as an industry. I think it's coming alive at the contractual level, but I'm glad to see we've started. Thanks,
Nathan. Sean, your view on this?
A great subject I was answering in the chat box. So I think ESG for us as a business is really important. Good governance leads to good businesses, leads to good companies, leads to a good place to live. So from a business perspective, good governance just works, and I probably an education manner for everybody will serve the UK PLC with benefits. A social value, again, all we're doing as engineers and surveyors is we're building our society. Why wouldn't we want to put a little bit back? Surprisingly or unsurprisingly, good social value or people with a good social conscience tend to do well in our industry. So we need to push it and focus on it. We're all living in a big world, the environment, and we did a little stats not too long ago. I think it was 1 million tons of material over the lifetime that hasn't gone into landfill. That's something we're really, really proud of. But we're living in a big world that's constantly changing. So ESG is we're putting it right to the front of our business model, and it is definitely bringing success to our business. The problem I see with it is that not all parts of the sector, larger organizations and more contractual organizations, tend to go back to the way it's always been. This aspect of it, if we take it on board, society will win, businesses will win, infrastructure will win. So I think it's something we need to constantly talk about and push forwards.
Thanks, Sean. Annabelle, I saw you nodding your head periodically there when Sean was speaking. Your views on the value issue?
Yeah, I think it's partly agree with everything that Nathan and Sean have just said there. I think there is an element as well of needing, benchmarking to look at what these ESG, criteria actually are. investors are looking at things differently now, but I think possibly what's missing in that piece is the benchmarking and actually the metrics against how you can measure those, and thinking about sort of social value in terms of the whole life costs. Really, it's about maybe reducing to start with. Do you need to use as much material? Do you need to take down in terms of infrastructure what's there? Can you recycle a lot of what's there? Can you reuse it? And I think that sort of disruption and that way of looking at things can really help improve a lot of those aspects, thinking about this whole issue.
Thanks, Annabelle. And Nick, I know you mentioned ESG when you made your opening remarks. Have you got any comments on this and how the industry needs to, basically grasp this? And how do you think that might feed into future disruptions in the sector?
I think the way that it will disrupt is actually down to data. I think we've got very established financial models and data models that everybody understands. And if you go to the financial institutions, you would put a set of figures before them before they would sign off. I don't think there's a well enough established non-financial set of data that becomes a bit more standardized. Some organizations, some investors understand what their principal drivers are, what their motivations are, and therefore will create that. But I don't think as an industry we've got that. As a technologist, I think this is where data becomes the oil to make this happen. It's actually, how can we have some benchmarks in place that people are judged against? And whether that comes out of COP26 in terms of setting those sort of percentage, not temperature changes, or people get used to the language of thinking about a project more than just pounds, shillings and pence.
Thanks, Nick, for that. And I just want to move now to maybe a final question, and I'll bring Nick in at the end for his observations on this particular question, but then also more generally. And that is, a number of our speakers have mentioned the role of data and its importance going forward, and using it in the right way as well. And also Nick, when he first started speaking there, he talked about digitally match fit organizations. How do we ensure that organizations are set up and working in the right way to fully exploit the potential of data and some of these other innovations? Because we speak about disruption, but really what it's about, I think, is about how we use the technology that we've actually got and the information that we've got at our fingertips to actually improve the services that we offer. So some kind of closing remarks really on how do we actually do that from an organizational perspective. And if I'll start with Nathan and then Sean and then Annabelle, and then I'll finish off with Nick. So Nathan first.
Thanks, Andy. Well, this probably is the billion-dollar question. I mean, I think three things need to be in place. The right mindset. So does an organization really consider intellectually, and then in the strategy and then in investment decisions, that data is absolutely the commodity for the remainder of this decade and beyond? It's the hot commodity. Secondly, are they focused on skills, digital skills, data skills, digital literacy? I think we need a lot of work to do on that. But then I think if you get the mindset right, you'll invest in skills. And then lastly, if you get the mindset right and you invest in the skills, you'll get the right structures in place. So our organizations, like my own and others across the supply chain, are we really set up to deliver the work that we've currently got and also move to an organization that's got room to accommodate this new ultra high value commodity of data? I think if those three things are in place, then we're probably fit for the future and can embrace this disruption rather than get disrupted by it.
Thanks very much, Nathan. Over to you, Annabelle. Sean's had to leave us. I think he's had to jump on a train. So apologies for Sean. But Annabelle, your thoughts on this application and use of data?
Yeah, I think it's all about effective communication. So that the right information, you can have the right information at the right time to be able to make the right decision. And obviously, with that goes having the right mindset. So it's about, remaining curious, remaining passionate, remaining collaborative, so that we can all together and have this shared goal, so we know where we want to be. So yeah, effective communication, I think, is the key to that.
Thanks very much, Annabelle. And just your closing thoughts on this and the whole issue, Nick.
I mean, I think when we're thinking about disruption, and as I've said at the beginning, being match fit to be coping with disruption, I think it forces organizations to go back to basics, really see where their core strengths are, and then by understanding that, they can then realize where the change opportunities sit. And I think Sean said in his piece right at the beginning here that the pandemic has sped up the ability to transform, because there's nothing better than a dose of a big problem to drive people's thoughts forward. And we can only but hope for things like COP26 that kind of energy that the pandemic gained gets the environment, gets the same sort of messages going forward. Data is the oil, data is king, all those sort of statements are there. How best we can use the information that we hold to make those great decisions, I think, is really important. And then look at how we might cope with the next disruption, or whether we want to be the disruptor. And I don't think organizations in the past have thought that way, and maybe there's an opportunity there. From a technologist perspective, change is our oil in some respects. But what I would say there is making sure we change for the right reasons and we use the right tech in the right way is a really important to that. And that's why we hold dear the whole purposeful innovation piece, because to serve the industry, we need to understand your problems, and the industry looking at its problems and being prepared to be open about looking at its challenges, I think, is going to really drive us going forward.
Thanks very much indeed for those comments, Nick, and thanks to all of our panel for exploring some of these issues in an open and collaborative and honest way today. It just remains for me to thank our panelists, to thank Sean Keyes from Sutcliffe, to thank Nathan Marsh from Turner and Townsend, Annabelle Precious from Civic Engineers, and also Nick Neder from Deltek, who I know are doing some really innovative work with a number of organisations across our sector. And I think that approach of purposeful innovation is one that I will take away with me and think about and also use again. Because, yes, there's disruption in our industry. Yes, there's change. But at the end of the day, it's actually got to be change and disruption for a purpose. And that is obviously not just serving our clients, but increasingly making a difference to society, because I think that's the way that the industry will actually raise its profile as well, I think, fundamentally, in terms of what it needs to be doing and how it needs to be seen across society as a whole. So I'd just like to thank everybody on the panel today, and thank everybody for taking part, for watching and for listening. And we'll see you on another Infrastructure Intelligence webinar in the very near future. So thanks very much and goodbye from the panel. Bye-bye.